$2,000 a day. In 1895, that is what Anna Gould was worth. Not earned, inherited. Her father's trust paid out roughly $50,000 every month, whether she lifted a finger or not. She was 20 years old, 5 feet tall, and by the honest admission of people who actually met her, not particularly good-looking. None of that mattered. In the marriage market of the Gilded Age, Anna Gould carried the largest price tag in America. I have read a lot of these stories. Rich American daughters swapping fortunes for European titles. Most of them end the same way. The money drains out, the marriage crumbles. The woman is left somewhere in England or France, wondering what happened to her life. Anna's story does not follow that pattern, because Anna, for all her quiet awkwardness, turned out to be the toughest person in every room she entered. She married a man who treated her fortune like a personal bonfire. In 11 years, he burned through the equivalent of $300 million on palaces, yachts, and parties so excessive they made front pages on 2 continents. When Anna decided she had seen enough, she did not write a letter or consult a lawyer first. She emptied the house while he was at work. I took the furniture, cut the telephone line. He came home to a dark building and a set of legal papers. What happened after that is stranger than the marriage itself. But it begins with a boy from upstate New York who became the most despised man in America, and a daughter who inherited his fortune, his stubbornness, and absolutely none of his reputation. Chapter 1. The Robber Baron's Daughter. Jay Gould once said he knew he was the most hated man in America and did not care. When he died in December of 1892, the New York Herald declared that his wealth had been purchased at too high a price. Other papers were less polite. He was born Jason Gould in 1836 on a dairy farm near Roxbury in the Catskill Mountains. The family was poor. Jay hated the work. He taught himself surveying as a teenager, left home at 15 with 50 cents and a sack of clothes, and by 21 had saved $5,000. His reputation was built in the late 1860s. Jay and 2 partners printed millions in fraudulent stock to block Cornelius Vanderbilt from seizing the Erie Railroad. When Vanderbilt sent authorities, they fled across the Hudson into New Jersey with suitcases of cash. Jay then bribed enough legislators to make the scheme legal. A year later, he attempted to corner the national gold market. The result was Black Friday, September 1869, a panic that destroyed thousands of investors. Jay kept his profits. That was the public man. The private one was different. Jay married Helen Day Miller in 1863. They had 6 children: George, the eldest, Edwin, Helen, Howard, Anna, born on the 5th of June, 1875, and Frank, the youngest. At Lindhurst, their Gothic revival estate overlooking the Hudson River in Tarrytown, Jay maintained an orchid collection so large it required a full-time gardener. He commuted to Manhattan by private steam yacht. His empire eventually included Union Pacific, Missouri Pacific, Western Union, and the elevated railways above Manhattan's streets. By the mid-1880s, he controlled approximately 1 in every 6 miles of railroad track in the country. Anna grew up inside that contradiction, adored at home, despised outside of it. Mrs. Astor's register of 400 acceptable New York families did not include the Goulds. The social doors of Fifth Avenue stayed shut regardless of what their bank accounts held. Helen Day Miller died in 1889. Anna was 14. 3 years later, tuberculosis overtook Jay. He died at 56. His estate was officially valued at $77 million, though estimates closer to the family placed the figure nearer to $125 million. Adjusted for inflation, that approaches $3 billion today. He left every cent to his children. not a dollar to charity. George received $15 million and the burden of managing the trust. Each of the other 5 inherited approximately $10 million. Anna was 17, orphaned, shut out of New York society, and suddenly among the wealthiest young women in the Western world. Her capital was locked in trust. What she received was the income, roughly $500,000 a year, enormous, steady, and completely beyond her control. Chapter 2. The Fortune Hunter. Bonnie de Castellan arrived in New York in 1894 with excellent manners, no money, and a very specific objective. He came from one of the oldest aristocratic families in France. His ancestors had fought in the Crusades. His father held the title of Marquis, and the family was broke, not genteel poverty, genuinely, embarrassingly broke. When the time came for Bonnie's parents to attend his wedding in New York, Anna's brother George had to pay for their passage across the Atlantic. George refused to pay their return fare. The old Marquis responded by calling Americans a stingy race. Bonnie was 27, blonde, blue-eyed, and immaculately dressed. He had fought 3 duels before the age of 25. He dabbled in politics and moved through the salons of Paris with an ease that suggested old wealth, even when his pockets were empty. The expatriate social circuit had already identified him as a professional charm merchant. He understood instinctively that in the transatlantic marriage market of the 1890s, a French title could be exchanged for American capital with very little friction. He told the press he had come to America to discover the country and, as an experienced sportsman, to hunt. He neglected to specify what kind of game. His search ended in Lakewood, New Jersey, at a party hosted by George Gould. Anna was there. They had crossed paths briefly the year before in Paris, but this was the real introduction. Anna had spent the previous 2 years fending off gossip columns that paired her with an actor, a society clubman, and at least one European prince. None of it had gone anywhere. She was 20, socially isolated by her family name, and eager to leave a world that had decided her father's sins disqualified her from belonging. Marriage was the exit, a titled marriage, doubly so. It would place her in a sphere where the Gould reputation carried no weight, and where her money spoke a language everyone understood. The American playwright Natalie Clifford Barney, who had settled in Paris, later offered her assessment of the couple. Anna, she said, was the most unwashed and dirty-looking creature she had ever seen. Bonnie was the most insipid. That judgment was cruel, and Barney was hardly objective, but it captured something real about the mismatch. This was not a romance. It was a negotiation dressed in evening clothes. Bonnie proposed after a handful of meetings and a family trip to Canada. The speed surprised everyone except him. The wedding took place on the 4th of March, 1895, at George Gould's mansion on Fifth Avenue. Archbishop Corrigan officiated. The press covered it like a diplomatic event. Reporters catalogued the dress in exhaustive detail, but saved their real attention for the jewelry. Anna's brother had given her a coronet of emeralds and diamonds valued at $40,000. Bonnie's gift was a brooch holding 250 large diamonds and 2 enormous emeralds, with double chains running to the shoulders. The display was designed to make one thing unmistakable. A transaction had been completed. Not everyone was charmed. A reporter in Omaha named Will Clemens wrote that the whole affair looked like a simple case of cash for a coronet. He imagined Jay Gould in his coffin, skeleton hands beating against the glass at the thought of his millions falling into the hands of, as Clemens put it, a French ninny who could not tell a bull market from a bear plunge. The journalist Elia Peaty hoped for a happy ending, but admitted she knew Anna was doomed. So did nearly everyone else. 2 days after the ceremony, the newlyweds boarded a ship for France. Anna was now the Comtesse de Castellane. She had left behind every drawing room that had ever closed its doors to her. What she was sailing toward, she could not yet know. Chapter 3. The Pink Palace. They had been married less than a year when Bonnie rented the entire Bois de Boulogne for a party. Not a corner of it, not a pavilion, the entire park. Roughly 2.5 times the size of Central Park. On the 2nd of July, 1896, for Anna's 21st birthday, he staged a recreation of the 5th day of festivities from the wedding of Louis XIV and Maria Theresa of Spain. Over 1,000 performers and servants worked through the night. 3,000 guests arrived by carriage. Fireworks broke across a lake. Orchestras played from boats. The cost was reported at $300,000, which in today's terms reaches somewhere past $9 million. For a birthday party. In a public park. That evening was not a celebration. It was a declaration of intent. The newlyweds had settled first in an apartment on Avenue Bosquet in Paris, purchased at a price that alarmed Anna's family before the ink on the marriage certificate had dried. Bonnie redecorated immediately. Then he grew restless. The apartment was not enough. Within their first year, he bought a yacht called the Walhalla, a 3-masted steam vessel over 230 feet long, requiring a crew of roughly 100 men under the command of a captain and 4 officers. The purchase price was $200,000. Refitting her cost another $250,000. The same year, Anna fell in love with the Château du Marais, a sprawling estate built in 1770, about 30 miles southwest of Paris. Bonnie saw potential in it. They bought it. Bonnie then added the Château de Grignon in southern France, an ancestral property he intended to restore from the ground up. 2 chateaux, a yacht, an apartment in Paris, and a staff that now numbered in the hundreds. In the spring of 1896, Bonnie purchased 2.5 acres of land on the corner of Avenue Foch and Avenue Malakoff, one of the most fashionable addresses in Paris. He hired the architect Ernest Sanson, one of France's leading neoclassical designers, and gave him a single instruction: build a replica of the Grand Trianon at Versailles, twice the height, in pink marble. Sanson collaborated with a younger architect named René Sergent. To establish the building's authenticity, they sourced marble from the same quarries Louis XIV had used to construct the original Versailles. Bonnie personally travelled to Italy to select individual blocks for the facade. When the first version of the exterior did not satisfy him, he had it refaced. When the second version still fell short of his expectations, he ordered a trompe-l'œil painted over the marble to make it look more like what he had imagined the marble should look like. A man painting an illusion of stone over actual stone because the real thing was not perfect enough. That detail tells you everything about who Anna had married. The palace took nearly 7 years to complete. Parisians called it the Palais Rose, the Pink Palace. When the doors finally opened around 1902, Bonnie filled it with Gobelin tapestries, portraits attributed to Rembrandt and Reynolds and Van Dyck, a 13th century carpet pulled from Lisbon Cathedral, and a clock that Louis XIV had once given to the Pope. Ornate 18th century furniture made by the cabinet maker André Charles Boulle became a particular obsession. He later wrote about it in his memoirs. I was driven by passion as strong as that of some players for cards. Decorating the Palais Rose was, in his own words, my slide into the abyss. The cost of the palace alone was reported at $3 million, and that figure covered only the building itself, before the furnishings, the art collection, the yacht, the chateau, the parties, and the army of servants required to keep it all running. Anna's annual income from the trust was large. but it was not infinite. Within the first year of the marriage, Bonnie had complained that he was hard up and unleashed a team of lawyers on the trust to access the capital itself. They succeeded. The dam broke. Over the course of 11 years, Bonnie consumed an estimated $10 million of Anna's inheritance. In today's currency, that figure lands somewhere near $300 million. Her family watched from across the Atlantic with growing alarm. George Gould eventually intervened and had himself appointed trustee of his sister's money by the French government. It slowed the bleeding. It did not stop Bonnie from spending. Chapter 4. What Anna wants, Anna gets. Bonnie de Castellane was, by all accounts, genuinely funny. That was part of the problem. Paris loved his wit. He circulated jokes about his own marriage the way other men distributed business cards, and the salons repeated them eagerly. He referred to the conjugal bedroom as the expiatory chapel. He described Anna as beautiful, seen from the dowry side. When asked about the other side of the medal, he smiled and let the silence do the work. Whether he actually coined all of these phrases or simply failed to correct the attribution is unclear. Either way, they entered the public record and stayed there. The humour concealed something uglier. Bonnie kept mistresses openly. His affairs were not discreet and were not intended to be. Contemporary accounts described relationships with women across Parisian society, and at least one biographer noted that Marcel Proust, who was a close friend, based the bisexual aristocrat Robert de Saint-Loup in his novel on Bonnie. Proust observed the marriage at close range. What he saw informed one of the most complex portraits of aristocratic vanity in French literature. Anna endured this for a decade. 10 years of public humiliation delivered with a smile by a man spending her inheritance while mocking her in drawing rooms she could hear the echoes from. Her family urged her to act. She waited. Whether out of loyalty to the children, fear of the scandal, or some private calculation of her own, she let the years accumulate. Then she stopped waiting. On the 20th of January 1906, while Bonnie was away on government business at the Chambre des Députés, where he held a seat as a conservative royalist, Anna moved. She had planned it in advance. By the time Bonnie returned to Avenue Foch that evening, the Palais Rose was dark. The furnishings had been removed. The telephone line was dead. The servants were gone. Anna and the children had relocated. Waiting for him was a legal filing for separation. I think about this moment sometimes when I read about Gilded Age marriages. So many of these stories end with the wife accepting her situation, writing letters to family, negotiating quietly through intermediaries. Anna did none of that. She dismantled the stage while the actor was still performing. The divorce proceedings became an international spectacle. French and American newspapers covered every session. The satirical magazine Puck published a full-page illustration depicting the case as a circus, with Bonnie as a performer and Anna clutching a bouquet made of legal indictments. The image now sits in the Library of Congress. Reporters on both sides of the Atlantic treated the case as entertainment, but underneath the caricatures was a straightforward legal reality. Bonnie had spent the money, Bonnie had broken the vows, and French law, unlike British law at the time, gave Anna a clear path to divorce. The court granted it on the 14th of November, 1906. Anna received full custody of the 3 surviving children. Bonnie received nothing. No settlement, no continued access to the trust, no share of the properties Anna had financed. The Château du Marais, which she had loved from the moment she first saw it, remained hers. The Palais Rose, that monument to Bonnie's appetite, technically stayed as well, though its purpose had evaporated along with the marriage. Bonnie accepted the verdict with the same theatrical composure he had brought to everything else. He told friends he had expected it. He did not contest the custody ruling. Within a few years, he pivoted to dealing antiques, leveraging the expertise he had developed while spending Anna's fortune to advise wealthy collectors. American museums benefited considerably from his eye. He later wrote a memoir. The title was The Art of Being Poor. Anna, for her part, said very little publicly. She had made her statement on the 20th of January when she cleared the house. Everything after that was paperwork. Chapter 5. The Longest Divorce Since Henry VIII. The civil courts had finished with Boni de Castellane in November of 1906. The Vatican was not so quick. Catholic canon law did not recognize civil divorce. In the eyes of the Church, Anna and Boni were still married, regardless of what a French judge had ruled. For Boni, this was more than a theological inconvenience. Without an annulment, he could not remarry within the Church, and by 1908, Anna had already married his own cousin, which made the situation considerably more personal. He filed his first petition for annulment around 1910, arguing that the original ceremony in New York had been defective. The case landed before the Roman Rota, the Vatican's highest matrimonial tribunal. Anna opposed it with everything she had. She hired canon lawyers. She submitted documentation. She fought the petition through every procedural stage available, and the Vatican offered many. If Boni succeeded, the legitimacy of her second marriage and the status of any children from it could be thrown into question. She would not allow it. Boni's argument centered on the 1895 wedding, performed by the Archbishop, who had officiated in George Gould's mansion on Fifth Avenue. He claimed the ceremony had not met the formal requirements of Catholic canon law. Anna countered that the marriage had been treated as valid for over a decade by every institution that mattered. The case consumed years. Lower tribunals sided with Boni. Higher tribunals reversed them. Rulings were issued, appealed, overturned, and appealed again. Newspapers tracked the proceedings with a fascination usually reserved for murder trials. Time magazine, reporting in 1925, reached for the biggest comparison available. Not since Henry VIII tried to annul his marriage with Catherine of Aragon, the magazine observed, had a matrimonial case spent so long before the courts of the Roman Catholic Church. 9 cardinals eventually heard the final appeal. In 1924, they ruled. The marriage was valid. The annulment was denied. Boni had spent 14 years fighting for a verdict that would never come. He absorbed the defeat with the theatrical composure he had brought to everything else in his life. By the 1920s, he had reinvented himself as a dealer in fine objects, leveraging the eye he had developed while furnishing the Palais Rose on someone else's money. His clients were often American collectors, which carried an irony he appeared to enjoy. He wrote a memoir and titled it, with characteristic flair, The Art of Being Poor. His health declined through the early 1930s. On the 20th of October, 1932, Boni de Castellane died in Paris at 65. He left behind debts, a reputation that had outlived his wealth by decades, and 3 sons he had barely been permitted to see since the divorce. The French press gave his funeral the warmth reserved for a man who had been, at the very least, never boring. Distinguished mourners filled the church. The art world acknowledged that whatever else could be said about him, his taste had been real. The Palais Rose outlived him by 37 years. During the Second World War, the German military governor of Paris, Karl Heinrich von Stülpnagel, used it as his headquarters. After the war, the French government hosted diplomatic conferences in its rooms. Proposals were made to classify the building as a historic monument. They were rejected. In 1969, the Palais Rose was demolished to make way for an apartment development. Everything Bonnie had spent a decade selecting, every surface he had agonized over, scattered or destroyed. The apartment block that replaced it is still there. Chapter 6. The Duke. Anna Gould's family had watched her first marriage collapse under the weight of Bonnie de Castellan's appetites. They had endured 11 years of transatlantic headlines. They had funded lawyers, absorbed embarrassment, and seen a significant portion of the Gould inheritance vanish into French real estate and Venetian glassware. So when Anna informed them, barely 2 years after the divorce, that she intended to marry yet another titled Frenchman, the reaction was not subtle. It was worse than that. The man she had chosen was Élie de Talleyrand Périgord, Prince of Ségon. He was 48. Anna was 33. He carried one of the oldest titles in France, a name that traced directly back to Charles Maurice de Talleyrand, the diplomat who had navigated Napoleon's rise, Napoleon's fall, and 3 subsequent changes of government without ever losing his footing. The Talleyrand name meant something in European history that very few surnames could match. It also came with complications. Élie was Bonnie's first cousin. His younger brother had married another American woman and divorced her after just 2 years. His father, Bosson de Talleyrand Périgord, had been one of the most famous dandies in France, a man whose reputation for style and excess had clearly shaped his nephew Bonnie. And Élie himself had been briefly imprisoned earlier in his life over forged promissory notes, a matter his family resolved through financial compensation to the victims. None of this reassured the Goulds. The wedding took place on the 7th of July, 1908, in London. Not in Paris, where the press would have descended. Not in New York, where the family could have staged it properly. London, in a near-empty church in Soho. One newspaper described the scene as the empty church where a prince and a millionairess wed. There were almost no guests, no spectacle, no coronets of emeralds or cascades of diamonds. It was the opposite of everything her first wedding had been, and that may have been the point. What followed is harder to pin down. American accounts of the marriage, written mostly after Anna's death, describe it as quiet and dignified, a genuine partnership, the kind of stable union her family had hoped for all along. The couple settled at the Château du Marais outside Paris and lived what appeared to be a comfortable, private life. Élie had his own money and his own standing. He did not need Anna's fortune to fund a lifestyle, and by all visible measures, he did not try. But French sources tell a different story. According to one account, the marriage proved just as unhappy as the first. Anna reportedly considered divorce early on, but chose to remain in order to keep the title of Duchesse de Talleyrand. If that version is accurate, it reframes her entire second act. Not a woman who found peace after a disastrous first marriage, but a woman who calculated that the social position attached to the Talleyrand name was worth more than personal happiness. I do not know which version is true. It is possible both contain a measure of honesty. A marriage can appear stable from the outside and feel hollow within. What is clear is that Anna stayed. For nearly 30 years, through personal tragedies that would have broken most people, she remained the Duchesse de Talleyrand Périgord. The title she had purchased with patience and endurance became as much a part of her identity as the name she was born with. Élie died of a heart attack in Paris on the 25th of October 1937. He was 78. They had been married for 29 years. Time magazine noted his passing briefly, identifying him primarily as the husband of the railway heiress Anna Gould. After 3 decades together, it was still her father's money that defined him in the American press. Anna was 62, a widow for the first time. The Europe she had known for over 4 decades was tilting toward catastrophe. Within 2 years, the German army would cross into France, and the aristocratic world she had spent her adult life navigating would cease to exist in any form she recognized. Chapter 7. 19 years old. Howard de Talleyrand. Périgord was born on the 16th of September, 1909, at the family's country estate outside Paris. He was the first child of Anna's second marriage. His full name was Charles Maurice Pierre Jason Howard de Talleyrand Périgord, a construction that stitched together the most storied diplomatic dynasty in France with the name of a boy from a dairy farm in the Catskills. The Talleyrand side gave him a title. The Gould side gave him a trust fund. Neither gave him what he needed. Almost nothing survives about Howard's childhood or adolescence. He does not appear in the society pages. He left no letters that have entered the public record. He held the courtesy title of Duke of Sagan after his father renounced it in his favour, which meant that a teenager in a country house technically outranked most of the French aristocracy. What that felt like from the inside, no one recorded. His younger sister, Hélène Violette, had been born in 1915. She would live to old age. Howard would not. In the spring of 1929, he was 19. He had met a young woman. He wanted to marry her. He went to his parents and asked for their permission. Anna and Elie refused. They had no objection to the girl herself. Their position was simple. He was too young. On the 17th of May, 1929, Howard shot himself in his parents' home in Paris. He did not die immediately. He was taken to a hospital on the Rue Puccini. His parents rushed to his bedside. For 11 days, he held on. The press did not learn about the incident until more than a week after it happened. When reporters arrived, Anna was ready. She released a statement that was remarkable for its time, direct, detailed, and, as Time magazine observed, entirely literate, which kept the tabloids from distorting the story. In the statement, Anna and Elie acknowledged that their son had harmed himself after being denied permission to marry. They stressed that their objection was solely to his age, not to the young woman involved. The tone was controlled, but unflinching. No evasion, no attempt to disguise what had happened or why. Howard died on the 28th of May, 1929. He was 19 years old. He was buried at Passy Cemetery in Paris. The New York Times ran the story on its front page. For a family that had spent decades managing its reputation across 2 continents, this was a wound that could not be managed. Anna had survived a husband who ridiculed her in public, a divorce that dominated headlines from New York to Paris, and a Vatican legal fight that stretched across 14 years. Those events, however painful, had operated within systems she understood. Courts, lawyers, carefully worded statements. This was outside all of that. A boy who asked his parents for something and, when they said no, decided he could not continue. Anna was 53. She had buried a daughter in infancy during her first marriage, and now a son who did not reach his 20th year. The public spectacles that had defined her until this point, the extravagance, the courtrooms, the Vatican, none of it weighed what this did. Anna and Elie remained together for another 8 years, until his death in 1937. Howard's absence pressed whatever was left of the marriage into something more subdued and more private than anything that had come before. Anna did not speak about her son again. Chapter 8. The Last Gould at Lyndhurst. In the spring of 1939, Anna Gould boarded a ship and crossed the Atlantic in the opposite direction from the one she had taken 44 years earlier. She was 63. She had left New York as a 19-year-old bride with a French title and a fortune. She returned as a widow, a duchess, and a woman who had outlived almost every version of herself the newspapers had tried to pin down. The America she came back to bore little resemblance to the one she had left. The Gilded Age was history. The great fortunes had been taxed, spent, or scattered. Her brother George was long dead. Her sister Helen, who had managed Lyndhurst for decades, had died the year before. The estate had passed to Anna, and with it a question that most returning exiles eventually face: whether the place you remember still exists, or whether you are moving into a memory. Lyndhurst had shrunk. The grounds that once stretched across more than 500 acres had been reduced to 67. The mansion itself was unchanged. The Gothic arches, the narrow hallways, the vaulted ceilings Alexander Jackson Davis had designed a century earlier. More than 50 pieces of the original furniture still sat where Davis had placed them. Anna moved in and, like her father before her, made no alterations to the exterior. The house had survived 3 families and nearly 100 years. She saw no reason to improve on it. She continued her father's other legacy. Jay had filled the greenhouse with orchids. Anna expanded the collection until, by the mid-1940s, it held over 5,000 plants, maintained by 9 gardeners in a glass structure that stretched nearly 400 feet. In 1945, she auctioned everything for the benefit of the Red Cross. The plants were valued at roughly $75,000. Time magazine covered the story, identifying Anna as the chic and spry 70-year-old daughter of the late financier Jay Gould. During the war, she opened the bowling alley her sister had built and turned it into a recreation space for wounded soldiers and returning sailors. It connected Anna to the Tarrytown community in a way her father never had. Jay Gould had been feared by his neighbours. His daughter was welcomed by them. She dressed, by all accounts, as though Paris had never ended. Visitors in the 1940s and 50s described a woman in her 70s and 80s who maintained the style of a French duchess, regardless of occasion. She favoured the soft colours and feminine silhouettes of the Edwardian era, an approach her American contemporaries had abandoned decades earlier. She dressed, one observer noted, to please herself. In a family defined by what money could buy, that small act of private defiance may have been the most telling. Anna divided her later years between Lyndhurst and the Plaza Hotel in Manhattan. She did not entertain on any grand scale. The woman who had once hosted 3,000 guests in the Bois de Boulogne now kept the company of her father's furniture and the view of the Hudson that had not changed since she was a girl. She died on the 30th of November, 1961, in Paris. She was 86. She was laid to rest beside her second husband at Passy Cemetery, in the same ground where her son Howard had been buried 32 years before. Before her death, she arranged for Lyndhurst to be donated to the National Trust for Historic Preservation. He had loved the estate, she said. So had her sister. So had she. The days of her childhood spent there were among the happiest of her long life. It was her wish that the people of Tarrytown enjoy it as a memorial to her father. Jay had been called the most hated man in America. His daughter gave his home to the country. The property is open to the public today. The furniture Davis designed is still there. The greenhouse is under restoration. Visitors walk the grounds past the bridge Jay built to reach his steam yacht, past the rose garden Helen cultivated, past the bowling alley Anna opened to soldiers during the war. 67 acres of what was once 500. Enough to remember what it was.